Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, our esteemed speaker, respondents, ladies and gentlemen, guests in Hong Kong and around the world, as I'm aware, on Zoom right now. Welcome to the APSS International Scholar Talk Series, hosted by the Center for Social Policy and Social Entrepreneurship at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Today's session is titled Social Enterprise, Current and Future Pathways to Impact. So my name is Warren Look. We were having some chit chat. I'm actually a practitioner in social entrepreneurship and social innovation. I'm the CEO of Good Lab in Hong Kong. We are a think and do tank for social innovation. And it's my pleasure to be the moderator for today's session. And a few interesting facts about this section, actually. I know we have a few more participants joining. We have dozens of participants registered for these sessions, and pretty much half of them are from the academia in Hong Kong and overseas. And the other half are actually practitioners in social entrepreneurship, again, in Hong Kong as well as overseas. So I guess, from what we see, social entrepreneurship has been gaining a lot of tractions around the world in the last decade. And it's a topic that is becoming increasingly important, not only just for, the academia or social entrepreneurs, but also for corporate businesses, nonprofit, as well as the government. Now, for more than 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic has pretty much transformed all our lives and the way institutions interact and magnified a lot of old and new social issues. And unfortunately, it has also brutally exposed a lot of weaknesses in our systems. But how might we make progress on these challenges and redefine the role of social entrepreneurship? And with change, there always comes opportunity. What are the possibilities to reinvigorate the practice of social entrepreneurship? And how should policymakers, social entrepreneurs, and the government, civic innovators, etc., respond to this? The future role of social entrepreneurship and social innovations, and the very definition of those in the post-pandemic world, is yet to be explored, actually. So this afternoon, or morning, wherever you are, we're honored to have two very prominent and world-renowned thought leaders in social entrepreneurship from Europe and Asia. And obviously they are, first of all, Professor Johanna Mair, our speaker of today. Johanna is a professor of organization, strategy, and leadership at the Hertie School in Berlin. She's now located in Berlin right now. It's 9 a.m. over there. And she co-directs the Global Innovation for Impact Lab at Stanford Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society. She also serves as the academic editor of the Stanford Social Innovation Review. Her research currently focuses on how novel organizational and institutional arrangement generates economic as well as social development, and has been published on numerous top-tier scholarly journals as well as on media. So I'm sure many of us here would have heard about the work of Johanna Mair somehow in your career or in the past. And there are actually, in fact, in addition to the information that I provided, there are a few very interesting, yet very impressive facts that I'd like to share with you all about Johanna. She is actually one of the founding mothers of social entrepreneurship as a field of academic research. And she was actually one of the first to publish on social entrepreneurship back in 2006. Her ideas have been transforming the field of research in social entrepreneurship and also the practice of social entrepreneurship, not just in Europe, but around the world as well. She also wrote a book called Innovation and Scaling for Impact, How Effective Social Enterprises Do It. It's a book that has won 3 major international prizes in the past. And the reason that we have invited her is also because she's actually one of the key fellows in the Center for Social Policy and Social Entrepreneurship at PolyU. And we are very honored to have her here with us today. But besides her, we also have Dr. Yanto Chandra, our respondent for today's session. Yanto is an associate professor at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University's Department of Applied Social Science and the founding director of the Center for Social Policy and Social Entrepreneurship. His research focuses on explaining the drivers, processes, and outcomes of social and sustainable entrepreneurship and investing as well as digital venturing. So Thank you so much again, Johanna and Yanto, for joining us today. And ladies and gentlemen, may I please take this opportunity to invite you all to give them a warm welcome with a big round of virtual applause using the emoji on Zoom or on the screen. And please feel free to put in the chat box your greetings as well. I'm sure they would love to hear from you.
We must thank Professor Eric Chui. Without the sponsorship of Department of Applied Social Sciences, we will not have this event today. So thank you so much, Professor Chui.
Thank you, Professor Chui. Thank you, Yanto. So in the talk that Johanna is going to give very shortly, she will be sharing with us her perspectives on the global and local trend of social entrepreneurship and present with us new ideas from comparative research and the data associated with that on social enterprises. And in turn, obviously, Yanto as a respondent will provide feedback on the discussion and offer his view from an Asian perspective. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'd like to invite our speaker today, Professor Johanna Mair, to take the virtual stage and share with us her insights. So over to you, Johanna.
Thank you so much, Warren, and thank you all for having me. Now, my friend and colleague Yanto Chandra gave me the license to talk about research. So sit back and enjoy what is now a research presentation. No, I'm kidding. What my objective today is really to exemplify also the role that research can play in these pathways to impact. And I often think we underestimate the role we can have as learning partners, as the ones that actually generate knowledge in order to make sure this is a fruitful pathway to impact. If you allow me, I will share my screen now. I will not be able to see you though, so please turn on your mic and shout if you have a clarification questions. And Yanto and Warren, please interrupt me if I go, as we always do. We academics go for too long. So here we go. I get started with the presentation and do hope everything works well. So let me see. All right, I guess you see what I have just on my first slide. I think I don't need to go into describing myself, because Warren did a wonderful job, and thank you for this very warm welcome. Now, let me focus.
May I just quickly, sorry, interrupt, would you be able to project the slides to full screen? Is that a possibility?
I have no idea what that is. I just shared. Oh, let me see. Do you see just the
full screen mode on the PowerPoint?
You see, I see, because I see that. Let me see. I see. Wait a second.
No worries.
I did this.
Yes. Well, this is showing your other screen. So
do you see now just the
yes, this is the right mode. Yeah, this is the right mode.
This is the right mode. All right. So
but,
you don't see the other.
But I don't see you now. I only see your screen.
Oh, I can go back to that. But you only see the screen now, no?
Correct. Yes. We can see your slide right now.
Just my slide. That's wonderful. Good. So let me just go back. And you see my slide, right? The one with the present? Yes. Okay, perfect. So,
but Professor, we don't see your camera now. We don't see your actual camera. We only see your photo on Zoom. Yep, perfect. This is perfect.
Perfect. Good. I'm sorry for the hiccup.
No worries. No worries.
Anyway,
thank you.
I don't think that I need to introduce what social enterprises are. They use market-based activities to address social problems, and therefore also combine the pursuit of social and economic objectives. So they are not new, no, but for some reason, these last 5-10 years, they have increased both in terms of relevance, perceived relevance in the public and policy and practitioners, but also in prevalence. We see more of them, so to say. So are we at an inflection point here? Is there something bubbling up where, and then going back to what we research can do to this? Is there something that we witness in a sense of a transition here? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because of what we see nowadays. You might be familiar with the movement of Catalyst 2030, the group of social enterprises I grew up with 20 years ago, forming really a movement around the world because they say, yes, we can, and the time is now as we go out of the pandemic to really allow also policymakers and the world know, the big muscles that we have. But there is indeed a window of opportunity I see that we have with policymakers and also policy infrastructures around the world. Just from my humble point of view and the work that I'm doing with the OECD, for example, with the European Union, the World Economic Forum is bringing together a number of stakeholders that include the Oxfams of this world, the British councils that have been working on social enterprise in parallel over these last 2 decades and now seem to actually join forces. And then, of course, we see a big movement and momentum also on the corporate side, as many more corporates actually are in this search, let's call it search for purpose now, and the B Corp movement is just one example. So are we at an inflection point? I think we are, and it's exactly, this is the moment where I think we as researchers do have a role in terms of really put our tools and our skills at use. And the way I try to find my role in this, how can a researcher be helpful and be in the conversation with also these stakeholders, is to remind, and I've done that over the last 20 years, especially with the EU, to remind policymakers that we need to sit with social enterprises and the problems they address in space, in time, and especially in the institutional context that they operate. The truth is that the meaning of social enterprise and social entrepreneurship is still ambiguous, and people use different things to refer to different organizations. But it is also true that social entrepreneurship manifests differently in different parts of the world. If I think about Europe and Belgium, we have most of all work integration social enterprises. If I think, and I saw a number of colleagues on Zoom from India, in Bangladesh, we have a lot of social enterprises that care about creating inclusive markets. So the flavor and the problem that social enterprises address differs, and therefore it is not surprising that we also often are in these conflicts of what do we mean by it. Also here, research can play an important role. And finally, especially in public discourse, and that often spills over to our academic discussions, there are the ideological debates still going on that suppress a little bit the evidence-based. For some people, social enterprises, they invent neoliberal invention of markets taking hold of the whole world. For others, social enterprise is the panacea and is basically making a welfare and the public sector obsolete. So you see, there are the opposite parts of the spectrum, and I think also we researchers can come in and really provide a knowledge base on this, so that we are not caught up in ideological debates. So the one task for research that I have found for myself is really to overcome this bias that we often have to treat all organizations alike. So there is not this one social enterprise. I'm aware that we have also the narrative of for example, Ashoka has a narrative of what a social enterprise will be, but still, I don't think that they all need to be alike, or they are also not all unique. No, my goal is in my research in this comparative work that Warren mentioned is to show, to entice you to think about, let's embrace this diversity rather than taming it. And I've written this in also in a few papers, and I put the notes in here. I'm inspired by the work of Alexander von Humboldt, who basically centuries ago did travel around the world, and was fascinating how the same plant looks differently in different parts of the world, right? So you have a same tree, a same family tree that looks different in South America than in Asia, and it's obvious because the soil is different, right? So just to give you an image of what I borrowed from. So what is now the database, so to say? Well, the data that I show you today is from a larger project that I've started together with my friends Ute, Stefan, and Marieke Huizentrud almost 20 years ago with the European Union. And it started with Selusi, and with force, we were really able to reach out to 9 countries, including China, including Russia, including 7 European countries, and take stock of social enterprises. So this is based, what I'm going to present to you, on a sample of more than 1,000 social enterprises, just for you to know. And I'm happy to also go into more the details of the method, but it's a very sophisticated method that includes 4 hours of time with the social enterprises online, and also interview. But basically, we had a very low threshold of what is a social enterprise. It has to have a social mission that is very prominent, and we check that in very different ways to make sure that it's the case. There has to be a earned income activity, so revenue generating from the sales of a product or a service has to be there, and it has to be more than 5% of total revenue. So it's not just a charity or just a classical donation-based nonprofit. And it has to be beyond, let's say, the venture phase. There has to be at least 1 full-time employee. And obviously for the European Union, and this was the early days, and I think now we have really robust data how important the social enterprises and the social economy in general is for every economy around the globe. Let me just go into some of the findings here. Again, if you remember, I want to convince you that one size doesn't fit all. Let's not tame diversity, but let's look through how different are they, right? And here also we see striking differences in different countries. If you think about how big these social enterprises are, there's big differences in the different countries. So for example, in the UK and in Germany, more than 40% have revenues more than €1 million. In Russia, they are very small, for example. When it comes to how many people work there, also huge differences, and you see a large number of full-time employees in the UK, which also shows the maturity of the social economy in the UK. One interesting thing, though, is how do volunteers matter in social enterprise, right? You remember the classical civil society work. We often said the third sector, civil society, is also the volunteer sector. Well, social enterprises seem to not rely on volunteers in how they do work, right? They seem to be much more professionalized. Though in China, and in Romania, we have proportionally more volunteers working for social enterprises. Now, we often talk about what legal form is there for social enterprises, and I will tell you a little bit more. But they are not bound to a specific legal form. They're not just nonprofit or just for profit. Actually, it's a little bit more nuanced, and I show that to you in a second. The other thing that I want to spend a little bit of time with you is to expose social enterprise not as this, isolated organization. No, they are actually active in what I call a market for public purpose. And it's important to understand who are their competitors, with whom do they collaborate, to really understand their role also in context. They're inherently social, and I'll show you some data in how they assess social performance, and what are the problems they address, and who are the beneficiaries. And finally, I will not have much time to do that, but it's also important that social enterprises are affected by the institutional arrangements they are part of, but they also, through what they do, they affect the institutional arrangements. Now, let's talk a little bit about the legal form, and this is an interesting finding in our work, is that social enterprises are not bound by a legal form. We often say we need a specific legal form for social enterprises. That's the most important thing. Well, every social enterprise would say, yeah, it would be fine to have a legal form, but they are not stopped by not having this legal form. They make do with what they have. And that also means they often combine a for-profit and not-for-profit legal form in order to make do. So it's combining dual forms is actually quite prevalent also, especially in the UK, the more mature markets are, but also in China we have a number, almost 18%, that combine both forms. One special thing about China is we have proportionally more for-profit legal forms than in other countries. And obviously, as a researcher, you tinker about that effect, and it certainly has to do also with another factor that we see. The younger you are as a social enterprise, the more likely you will be incorporated as a for-profit. So which basically indicates also, helps these people who would say the future of business is social enterprise. So it also goes in that direction. Now, let me spend a little bit of time on this idea of social enterprises being part of a market of public purpose. That's how I coin it. The social space and the area of exchange that encompasses both private and public efforts to address the social problems. And we can actually get a glimpse of this market if we actually look at the sources of finance. How are these social enterprises financed? How do they interact with the public and private sectors? And I will show you a little bit of that. But just in terms of finance, also interesting that remember, we made this benchmark of 5% of social enterprises should earn their own income. Well, we were surprised that this was, top by far. On average, these 1,000 social enterprises in our sample financed almost 60% of their activities in their way. So speaking to, how self-sustained most of them are. Grants matter, donations matter relatively little. Investment, so basically equity, it's actually not existing apart from China. In China, you have actually equity investments in social enterprise, which we didn't see in that way in other countries. Also interesting, perhaps, and a little warning, loans and membership fees as a ways to finance are negligible. So membership fees, for those of you who know how cooperatives works, that's a financing way of cooperatives. We don't see that so much in our sample. But interesting thing is the loans. No, you might wonder, like, a social enterprise should be able to get a loan, go to the next bank and say, can I have a loan? Well, it's often not a very viable option. And then if you dig a little bit deeper and go to your next bank here in Berlin or in Palo Alto or in Italy, in Austria, it becomes clear regular commercial banks are not equipped to actually give loans easily to social enterprise. So here, a lot of work to do. And again, how researchers can actually exemplify, hey, here's a problem that we need to address. So interacting with the public and private sector also, and I just want to briefly look at this data. It speaks for itself. You see on the left-hand side, sales to private sector, sales to public sector, and the differences. And on the right-hand side, the grants that you get either from the private and and public sector. And you see how different this picture is. And of course, it's always also a matter of the particular time. This is data that we collected in 2015. So if you go to the right-hand side, you see Portugal, a lot of grants from the public sector at that time, which is now 6-7 years ago, a lot of trust in the public sector in social enterprises, and it paid off, because today in 2022, Portugal would be the country that is seen as the poster child for social enterprise policy in Europe, for example. But let me stay a little bit more in this interacting with the public sector. So how do social enterprise interact with this public sector? And you see both here, whether they get funds in the gray line, and whether they are selling to the government, whether the government is actually paying for the services and products they offer. And you see also here quite a bit of a difference in Sweden, for example. SE is Sweden, the second from the bottom. You know, the government and social enterprises are very interlinked. You know, they sell a lot to the government because the welfare system is very tightly organized, and they also get fundings in terms of grants, not just income. In China, it's a different story. In Russia, it's a completely different story again. And you see also here, it's worthwhile really interrogating the relationship between social enterprises and the government. Now, let me come to something that for some reason we don't talk much, competition. Competition. And again, if we take this market for social purpose, it's normal. It's obviously obvious that social enterprises compete, because it's hard to imagine that no one addresses or tries to address this social problem. And there are indeed in all countries private and public organizations that are active. Now, we asked these thousands social enterprises, so who are your competitors? And it's also interesting, like what they mentioned. So in China, Russia, and UK, they would say the biggest competitor they see are businesses. In Germany, it's and Portugal, Sweden, it's other nonprofits, and in Spain, it's other social enterprises. But what is also interesting, most of them do not see the government as a competitor. No, so basically they see them in parallel to them. What is also interesting, that 20% of whom we asked, they say we don't face competition. So this 20% say we don't face competition. So that also made us pause and triggered another line of work that, if we have time, I'll show you a little bit of data that triggered this curiosity. If they don't face competition, what does it mean? How does it mean that they are so novel in, let's say, China? And how conventional do you need to be actually considered as a legitimate and credible player in this market for public purpose? And again, I will show you a little bit of a newer analysis on this if we have time. Competition goes in the world of social enterprises also hand in hand with collaboration. And it might not be surprising to most of you who know how social enterprise work that it's only 1.1% of all the social enterprises that we worked with, they said they did not collaborate in the last 12 months. So 99% said, yes, of course we collaborate, right? And what is then more interesting is to understand with whom do we collaborate. And you see here that the countries listed and then the collaboration partner. And it's interesting also to see the differences. So in China, in Russia, they collaborate with for-profits. That's really a big pattern. In Germany, with the national government. What is always interesting in these type of data is to look at what is blank, what we do not see. So for example, why do we not see a collaboration with the national government in China, for example, or in other countries? Now, what is left out blank? So that also just gives you an idea here how we, with interrogating some patterns, can reflect back on some important patterns. And again, I mentioned it already, in what is also becoming much more prevalent is, do social enterprises collaborate with local authorities? And in Sweden and Portugal, that's very much the case. No, social enterprises is really being seen, and actually, interestingly, the OECD goes very much in that direction, that they are seen as the ones that help also especially mitigate challenges at the local level. Now, I mentioned that we were interested in the social footprint of social enterprises. Now, let me tell you that it was interesting, not so interesting, but still nice to see that most social enterprises systematically capture and report their social performance. 65% do say, in Portugal, even almost 100%. Now, what is the most important or more prevalent indicator for reporting social impact? It's still probably not surprising to you, how many people do we reach, the number of beneficiaries. That's the single most used marker of progress. Obviously, you might wonder, like, how much does this tell us really on how much impact, how much progress on the very problem we have met? It's a nice indicator that allows to compare, but yet it doesn't really say too much about how much progress we make on this problem. There's a second interesting marker, which is how satisfied are the beneficiaries of us. In Sweden, the most prevalent. By the time we did this, not the second most prevalent in Germany. Now in Germany, the most prevalent one. There is one interesting indicator that only came out in China, that social enterprises used, and that goes back to the earlier conversation, and they also measure how many volunteers we have as an indicator of impact. So, and I leave that to you as a way to interpret that. In which problem domains are they active? And here we use an old classic categorization by Lester Salomon and Helmut Anheier to differentiate between problem domains in culture, education, health, social services, and environment, and developing and housing. And you see the very dominant focus here on development in general and housing. Apart from China and Russia, interestingly. In China, we at that time, and I assume that it's still the case, we have many more social enterprises as in other countries focusing on the environment. Health is also a very important topic in Germany, in China, in Sweden. Education and research is also important. Education is interesting because we all countries that we surveyed have a very established education system, and yet there's so much effort going in from social enterprises. That also tells you quite a bit that there must be something wrong with the system in place. No, so again, ways to interpret also this data. When it comes to beneficiaries, so who do they actually target? Who they want to make a change, make impact on? Also here, a very different or nuanced picture here. The first column here, it's also probably not surprising to you as children and youth are an important constituency for social enterprises across the globe. We probably knew that before, and it came out very much in the data with slight differences, very important in China, Portugal, lesser so in Spain, but still ranking high. So here I just show you the 5 most important beneficiary groups in each country. You also see here, you can use this data also as a way to understand how welfare is organized in the different countries. And I just give you an idea of what it tells you. So for example, you see unemployed people in Spain and Sweden as a target group, but not in Germany. It's because in Germany you have structures that take care of unemployed people. No? So what you don't see is also always quite interesting. In China, interestingly, in our data, left behind communities, rural communities came up strongly, probably not a surprise to you, but not prevalent, obviously, in other countries. So you see also differences in here. In Russia, women and elderly were, in contrast to other countries, a key constituency of social enterprise. Again, it's always interesting to see what is similar and what is different in the different countries. Now, the reason why I showed you this, patterns is really to convince you that social enterprises do not operate in an institutional vacuum. We need to also make sure that we understand, the societal, economic, and political aspects in their environment. And I think this is also important so that we can also help, especially policymakers, to not fall into this trap and have this one solution for everyone. So it's more important for us in Europe because we tend to basically develop solutions out of Brussels and then disseminate them through all the 27 countries. And what the data also shows, it might not do justice to the organizational realities of these social enterprises, but especially not to also the realities of how social problems manifest in different countries. So this is why I do believe that there are opportunities for us to really, as researchers, to inform practice and policy making. I know that I probably went too fast. I just show you one more thing, and I think I will skip the novelty and conventionality part, but I show you one finding, and this is really work that is in progress. And the question, so are social entrepreneurs, so leaders of social enterprises unique? What is special about them? Let me show you how we think about that question in the context of this particular project. So this is again with Ute Stefan and Marieke Huisentruth. We again use these more than 1,000 social enterprises and then particularly focus on who leads them, who are the leaders. And what we are trying to do is to capture their values. Are their values distinct? Are the values somehow something that allow us to understand a leader of a social enterprise is different from a leader of some, an employee, a manager, and so on. Now, just as a reminder, values, personal values here I'm referring, they are different from traits, they are different from beliefs, and they are different from norms and attitudes. They serve as standards for judging others and our own behavior. They show you a little bit what do we hold important. And they also are pretty robust when it comes to transcending situations and actions. And it's also under personal values research, we have a pretty recognized body of work. It goes back to Schwartz's work that categorizes values in different categories, but the more higher order categories are these: openness to change, do I want to stand out? Do I care for independence, creativity, risk-taking, versus conservation? Do I care about tradition, fitting into society? And on the other X, these pro-social values. Do I care about others, family, friends, or do I also care about my own advancing? These are a little bit the higher order values that he plays with, and you see how they also might be in conflict. The pro-social, caring about others, versus pro-self, and openness to change versus conservation. So what we did with this data from CIFOR is we actually looked at our 1,000 45 leaders, and compared them to comparative occupational groups. And that's the nice thing about this setup, because we can use data from the European Union and other data that give us values of employees, of managers, of entrepreneurs, so basically traditional commercial entrepreneurs. And we can see how these four values, these four higher order values, really pan out. And you see, I don't know whether you see that really clearly, we see a little bit how the blue ones of the social entrepreneurs differ from others, but when it comes down to significance, it's actually social entrepreneurs or leaders of social enterprises stand out significantly from others in their openness to change. They are more open to change, and in their lower score of conserving, holding on to this transition. What is interesting is that they do not stand out significantly when it comes to this pro-socialness, no? And this is interesting because you know the narrative of others, no? The selfless leader or the ethical fiber or of a social enterprise. We didn't find that so much evidence for that, but we did see evidence on the openness to change and lower levels of conservativeness. But let me stop here and really give Yanto a chance, and I will go just through this and finish with this. I do believe the future of social enterprise is bright, but it will require all of our efforts, and that includes us researchers, to make sure that this potential and the hard work that social enterprises and everyone involved is doing to the fore. And what I would wish for that we have a role in evidence-based discussions, honesty and openness in exchange, and not just being blinded by ideological debates, and also the willingness to adjust existing social institutional setups when we know from data or from evidence that something could be easily adjusted. Let's do it. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present this, and I'm going to flip this back.
Thank you so much, Professor Mair, for your very insightful presentation. I was particularly intrigued by your sharing and finding around, there's no one-size-fits-all form for social enterprises. Right now there are many different forms, and they are all active participants in the market for public purpose. And so that gives me a new perspective about the definition of social entrepreneurship now. So that's my kind of immediate reaction. But in light of Johanna's perspective, I'm sure, Yanto, you would have some feedback or respond to that as well. Would you like to share kind of your point of view as well to us, please?
Thanks so much, Warren. It's actually quite a challenge to comment on. Johanna's work would have been one of the best pieces of work ever done on the topic, and also she has a very very comprehensive coverage on this. It's almost like if anybody wants to take a course on social entrepreneurship, by being here for 1 hour, you get to hear all the things that you need to know about it. I think I'll stop there. No, I'll continue. So I think I also noticed from the participants, quite a number of them are not from the field, or they may not be so familiar. So let me give you a little bit of examples first before I talk further. Johanna talked about poster child. So I'll give you two poster childs of social enterprises. Let's say one in Hong Kong and one from China. In Hong Kong, you could see Lightbee, Guangfeng, which is an alternative housing solutions, which is not a traditional commercial company, and it's not a non-profit organization, but it's a combination of both, which is why it's called a social enterprise. But it's not just delivering a traditional type of, let's say, work integration type, but they're offering a very innovative housing solution. And another example from China we could use is Zhangyou, which is a social enterprise which employs a lot of disabled people, particularly people with blindness, because they found a lot of them are very talented with computer programming. So they become a computer programmer working for Zhangyou. And Zhangyou has a lot of clients, including Alibaba and etc., all the big software companies. So that's some examples. Going back to Johanna's work, I do agree in many of the points that she raised, and which I would like to kind of like reiterate and kind of like interpret it or contextualize it a little bit in our region here, in this region. So social enterprise is actually a new category of organization, which we didn't quite see maybe 30 years ago, which in those times perhaps the separation or the division of labor between the public sector, the private sector, and the non-profit sector is pretty clear. We don't really know why, but we do see there is a blurring of these boundaries between these three sectors, and that's why we see social enterprise emerging and kind of like embracing the values from the public sector, like publicness, and the non-profit sector, non-profitness, and also the private sector, such as using innovation and technology and how to manage an organizations efficiently and effectively. And also the part on social enterprise is like a forest. I think that's a very, very nice metaphor. And I think Johanna has pointed that out very clearly, that there's no single forms. In fact, social enterprises varies across forms, legal entities, the problems that they're solving, the type of beneficiaries, etc., etc. And also, social enterprise has become a new occupation in Hong Kong, and also to many friends in China. To say this is because if you actually look at the media, we didn't really hear so much about people becoming or jumping into this occupation called being a social entrepreneur or social innovator. So this is quite a relatively recent phenomenon, perhaps in the past 15 years in Hong Kong, and a little bit younger history in mainland China. I actually did a talk not long ago for a local university, and I did the counting, not a very comprehensive one, but quick and dirty one. Apparently, based on that calculation, there's only around less than 1% of all small and medium-sized organizations, less than 1% are social enterprises. So you can see, if you take the whole universe of small and medium enterprises, social enterprise is just about 1%. So it's very, very tiny. Definitely it's growing, and you can also see that there's a tremendous opportunity for growth. And what I would like to say further is the idea of social enterprise being a kind of a combination of the values or the practices of different existing sectors, like the public, the non-profit, and the non-profit sector. So you also see a lot of non-profit organizations in Hong Kong that are starting their own social enterprises, and we also see more businesses helping or even launching their own social enterprises, and also the B Corp movement, which Johanna has talked about, which is one way for commercial companies to show that they can really do things beyond just a corporate social responsibility, which has been there in Hong Kong for quite some time. But it seems that the benefit corporation is a kind of you can call it a more serious way to date with social problems. And there's a lot of things. I also see a kind of a change of unit of analysis of how Johanna talked about it. So she talked a lot about the macro level factors, the models, the organizations, but also at one point then she has another research on the micro level, which is looking at the values and value constellations. And towards the end, she also looked at again some sort of practices between those conventional and novel type of social enterprises. Actually, I have a bit of comments on that, which I would like to ask for Johanna's comments in a moment. And also there are some comments about the kind of the nature of social enterprises in China and how they're going to differ with in other parts of the world. And one part that struck me was in the data by Johanna is the social enterprise in China don't have a clear collaboration with the government. I had a book from 2016 with a number of different colleagues and practitioners, and also based on my own reflection, we do think that when we talk about social service delivery in China, a lot of these social services are provided by the government. They're inheriting the socialist model, but also there's a lot of Gongo, government-owned non-governmental organization called Gongo, which are actually a major provider of social health and educational services in China. And I think what could be a potential reason for why there is not so much interaction between SEs in China with the government is perhaps I don't know, perhaps it's the imprint of how the social enterprise in China that emerges. I think a lot of them were related to commercial entrepreneurs who set up the social enterprises. So the imprint of the social enterprises it has a commercial origin rather than a non-profit origin. So, and through that sort of origin, it finds its ways very quickly into the business world, and they try to work really well and selling their products and services, and even competing with the commercial companies in China. So I think that origin is kind of like a very interesting question to look at. But also looking at the legal form. Why are many of the legal forms for the social enterprise in China are in the for-profit, and why they receive a lot of equity investments, which we don't really notice in other parts of the world? I think that's also kind of related to not only the origin of many of the social enterprises from people with a commercial background, but also the rise of other institutions. We know that there is social investment and social enterprise forum. So they kind of like bringing together the world of investments. And in this type of forum, we will be quite surprised to see that they have all the big tech from Tencent, Alibaba, and those who are actually attending this event. So you can see the kind of a lot of these big tech, which are actually for-profit organizations that are entering the social enterprise space. So we can see a lot of interactions, and that's why the legal forms and even equity investments became very possible in the Chinese social enterprise landscape. In Hong Kong, it's also not so much of a different, with a little bit perhaps differentiation, because number one, Hong Kong entered the social enterprise space a little bit earlier than China did, and also Hong Kong has a very obvious two origins. Number one, you have the social enterprises sector that was started by the non-profit organizations. Actually, long before the social enterprise label became popular, there's this organization called Ping On Zhong, now it's called SCHSA, which is providing a sort of device to help the elderly who need some emergency care. So if elderly suddenly fall down in the bathroom or they're lost on the street, so they can press the button and that will connect them with a call center. So this was kind of a very kind of early stage before it was even named as a social enterprise. So, and then later on, we also have more and more people with a business background who jump into the wagon and started their social enterprises such as Lightbee. We also have Diamond Cab, which is a very special taxi services that serve the elderly and people with disabilities, so anyone on a wheelchair. And also, we also see a lot of organizations spurred by young people, and this is actually quite interesting. I happen to meet a young girl who is just 15-year-old, still in high school, and she started a second-hand bookshop as a social enterprise, and that is kind of like a very quick snapshot of what we have in Hong Kong. I guess my sort of comments I would like to sort of ask Johanna is, the first one is that when you talk about the social footprint, one big part of the social footprint for social enterprise is the beneficiaries that social enterprises are targeting. And you mentioned that the majority in all these 9 countries, the beneficiaries served by the social enterprise tend to be more than one. So each social enterprise may be serving 2, 3, or maybe 4 or 5 different type of beneficiaries. Maybe one social enterprise is serving disadvantaged youths, but also maybe new migrants or elderly. I was just wondering whether the richness of the type of beneficiaries served by the social enterprise, whether this is an indicator of success, or is it more like a strategy to win? Because in our own study in Hong Kong, actually we look at over 2,000 Ashoka fellows, social enterprises set up by Ashoka fellows. We studied about 2,000 over of them. We found that the majority of the social enterprises use 2 or more strategies. So they don't say this is our strategy to serve or to solve a certain type of social problem, but they have 2 or more. So that is my first question: whether this the focus of multiple type of benefit is part of that strategy, or it's just an indicator of success. So in other words, is the type of beneficiaries is an IV or DV? From a research
I'm happy to talk about that. I'm conscious of time, and I think we are running out of time. So I would love to take this question also in line with some others that I see on the screen. Susanna is asking about the impact footprint, for example, and Rina is asking about different differences in developing countries. So Rina, my more field work is much more in developing countries, so I have a pretty good feeling for that, and it speaks to also the difference that Yanto mentioned. So out of my work in developing countries in Bangladesh and India, I'm used to social enterprises that they are almost like in a business world, a multi-business. No, they do education, they do health, so they are diversified. Think about BRAC, it's basically a multinational in that. Then when we look at our data, which is European, Russia, and China, we didn't see that diversification. And it's not surprising, because in those countries, the welfare system is much more established. So there are not these big gaps or voids that are unfilled, right? But going back to your point, Yanto, the beneficiaries, like, do I serve more than beneficiaries, is clearly a strategy. What we see is, and that was surprising to me, I just didn't show it to you. You saw the data on whether they are focusing on education, on health, and housing. We didn't see, again, much diversification. Basically, an organization doing both development and housing and education. But what we saw is within education, they are diversified. They are diversified within education. They're doing different activities, and therefore also catering to the needs of different beneficiaries. So your finding is very much aligned with also the data that we have. It's just a way of how you phrase it. So I absolutely can subscribe to that. And going back to Chan's point on impact, no, it was actually Susanna's point on impact. It's a difficult point, because of course, what can you compare? You can easily compare how many people do I reach, but the harder question on impact are really how much progress have you made, really have we made, and also progress that in a way is not falling back in that we don't fall back in a few years. And I think this is also especially this conversation about real impact is where we need honesty and openness. And also this is the book that also Warren mentioned, Innovation and Scaling for Impact, that Christian and I wrote, really is an effort to allow a conversation among funders and social enterprises how hard this work is. And innovation is not the holy grail. Innovation needs to be combined with scaling in order to achieve impact. Innovation is an investment in terms of resources, energy, and it creates a potential for impact. But you can reach impact through scaling, becoming better and bigger. So I think there's a lot, again, here where we also as educators and researchers can help to get the baseline for conversations going, and therefore also co-educate ourselves. All of us need to educate ourselves, social enterprises, funders, policymakers, and we also educators have a role to play here. So
Johanna, you brought out a very good point. I guess, you know, we all have a role to play in this space, and there's a lot of opportunities ahead of us, especially in the post-pandemic world. How do you see, for example, individuals who are attending this webinar or practitioner do in order to, you know, get the most out of the emerging opportunities that you mentioned about social entrepreneurship in the future, and as reflected in your data? Would you have any advice, suggestions for us?
Yeah, and I'm happy to conclude with that, because I know that we stretched the time, and thank you for those who are still listening in. This is, Warren, this is why this individual level line of work that I briefly showed you on values is important, because we are witnessing a new type of occupational group, no? And I'm not just talking about the brave people that start a venture or start a social enterprise, but also the very brave people that may switch careers, right, and go from a very solid and well-paid job and join a social enterprise, because we still have a pay gap. Let's not forget that, right? And join that. So I think it's really important for me to make sure that we do not glorify the social entrepreneur per se, because they themselves don't want to be glorified. They basically resist that, because we put so much on their shoulders. Also, coming back to the impact session, you have to single-handedly make progress on this problem. No, they can't. It's too much to ask, and they cannot do it alone. So this is why we need to cultivate a spirit of an occupational group, where we as educator play a role in making sure that people have a realistic understanding what it takes to make a career in this profession, and also make sure that they don't have to think about, whoa, I need to be this selfless, I don't know, altruistic person, otherwise I'm not good for this job, right? So I think also on that front, we need to make progress. And the final point I want to make on that, Warren, and that has been my ambition 20 years ago when I developed the first MBA course on this in Europe. My ambition was always not to isolate or silo social enterprise in the curriculum, but mainstream it, right? Mainstream it. And not every MBA or not every student will become a social entrepreneur. Not everyone will join a social enterprise as their first choice, but eventually they will either collaborate, join them, understand them, and that's our job as educator. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Professor Johanna Mair, for your great, inspiring sharing and presentation just now. And thank you again to Yanto for your response and kind of contextualizing it using Hong Kong and Asia as the context. It really adds a lot of color, contrasting Europe and Asia. So thank you so much to our speaker today and our respondent today. I'd like to invite our guests or our audience members to give them a big round of applause, or put your greetings and you know your words of thanks in the chat box as well.